all you lovely breadheads. Nelson and Christina here, just wanting to send a quick video to kind of introduce you to our sourdough starter packs and specifically what a sourdough starter is. We also wanted to say thank you for being along with us on this 7-year journey, or if you're new to the Wild Breadhead community, welcome, and we hope you have fun as you learn to bake your own sourdough bread. And Nelson's going to kind of explain what a sourdough starter is, just to get you started on the right foot.
So sourdough starter, that's it's the key ingredient to making sourdough bread. Without it, we're just making dough. But basically flour and water are all that make up sourdough starter. And when you keep that at an appropriate temperature and we welcome in the beneficial bacteria and yeast, that's essentially a sourdough starter. So it's important to note that there's a cycle to the starter. It's living, breathing, and it needs to eat food. So we need to feed it flour and water. It'll then consume that flour and water, and then it's going to get hungry again. So there's this ebb and flow of refreshing to ripeness to refreshing to ripeness. And what goes along with that cycle is a growing in volume. So when we refresh a starter, it's just going to be dough. There's not going to be any air bubbles in there, but over time the bacteria are going to create things like acids. The yeast are going to create things like alcohol and CO2, and so the acids are what kind of give you that sour flavor. The CO2 is what's going to give you the rise and create those air bubbles in our bread that we like. So when you refresh a starter, it's going to be dense dough, and then over the course of maybe a few hours or maybe half a day, depending on some factors we'll explain later, it's going to increase in volume, and that's because of those air bubbles building up. So basically, you're going to refresh, it's going to be dense, it's going to start to consume that flour, metabolize into CO2 and other things, it's going to rise. The surface of that dough is going to be domed as it's coming on the way up. That surface is going to flatten out when those bacteria and yeast are running out of food. And then it's going to actually collapse when, excuse our neighbors, it's going to actually collapse once those microbes have completely run out of food, and so they're no longer able to produce CO2 to keep inflating that balloon. So there's a term that we like to use, ripeness. When it comes to judging the ripeness of a starter, there's a big window of acceptable ripeness for using this starter to make bread. But we do want to try to catch the starter when it's near that peak. When the dome is starting to flatten out, that's kind of on the younger side, a little bit underripe. As it starts to flatten out, maybe concave just a little bit, that's about ripe. And if it's starting to collapse at all, that'd be considered a little bit overripe. You can use starter in those three phases to make wonderful bread. Underripe, ripe, and overripe are going to each lend to different characteristics in the final bread. And I think right now we're just going to aim for the middle, and that gives us the most leeway on either side, so that we can hopefully find success. And then a couple other notes is that temperature has a really big effect on how quickly those microbes do their metabolism. So if we keep it at a nice warm kind of ambient room temp, maybe mid 70s to 80 degrees, that's where these microbes are happiest, and it's kind of a predictable rise and fall. But if we store the same starter in the fridge, we can really draw out that same process. What might take a few hours to half a day, we could take a week. And so the refrigerator is a tool we can use to slow down the rise and the ripening of our starter so that we don't have to feed it multiple times a day. That can end up being quite a lot of work and a little bit wasteful as well. And something else to note is that on the warmer side, if you get up into the mid 80s or low 90s, those microbes are going to act really quickly, and it can be difficult to control the rise of bread or the rise of starter in this case. So if you can find a stable environment in your home, mid 70s for when we're building our starter to make bread, that's going to be ideal. And then one other analogy I like to use So temperature plays a big role, but another thing we can control is the size of starter we carry over into a newly refreshed starter and how that affects the amount of time from refreshed to ripe. So imagine we have a population of individuals. The population is going to be our sourdough starter in this case. If we have, let's say 10 people, 10 sourdough starters in this case, to 10 meals of food, they're going to eat through that in a relatively short time. If we have 10 sourdough starters to 100 pieces of food, it's going to take those 10 sourdoughs much longer to consume that food. So with all that said, if we carry over a smaller amount of starter and have a larger amount of fresh food, it's going to take longer. And we have some charts that are going to help convey this in a more visual explanation, but just hoping to present the idea of not only using temperature, bear with us here, not only using temperature to control the time it takes to get from newly refreshed to ripe, but also the amount of carryover starter. And hopefully that's going to just introduce that concept, and there's going to be some supporting documents that will hopefully clear up any questions. And then I think that's mostly it on the sourdough starter. So the goal here is to have fun, learn to make some bread. If you already know how to make bread, hopefully we can give you some pointers that will lead to more consistency, or feeling like you understand the principles a little bit better, so as to then take these concepts and build your own recipe, build your own process. But also wanted to express my gratitude for joining us on this new bread venture, and hopefully it's a success and we get you guys all baking fresh bread in your homes as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. Good luck. Happy baking.